I'm honored that you invited me here. So the first thing I'd like to do is ask you a question. Did you know that in the United States, companies spend enough money, actually they waste enough money, that they could pay for an all-inclusive tropical vacation for every single person in the United States? I know. I know, I see Lauren's face like, what? What? I know it sounds crazy, but actually, the Harris poll did a study together with Grammarly. And what they came up with was that approximately $1.2 trillion gets wasted every year on really bad communication, miscommunication, which comes up to about $12,500 per employee per year. I know.
I won my month.
I know it sounds far-fetched, but actually, I'm going to give you a few examples of how we contribute to this, but I'm also going to give you some tools so that you don't become one of these statistics. Okay? So let's take a look at that. I'll give you an example, and it might sound strangely familiar to you, or you might be like, oh my gosh, that sounds like something that I've gone through. So let's start out with an example that happened to me just recently. A few months ago, I was working with a new client, and of course, you need to go through a bunch of, housekeeping things to get the POs started and all that. So I was in the client's platform, and I was getting stuck. I couldn't move forward. So I get in touch with my stakeholder. He refers me to Daniel, who's the support guy, right? So I'm like, Daniel, I'm having this difficulty. Can you help me out? And I send him an email. A day or two later, Daniel responds to my email, but doesn't answer my question. Okay, so I'm like, okay. Maybe he's in a rush. So I write another email, a little bit more clear, trying to give him a little more info. And I wait another couple of days, and he sends me this email with like 2 cryptic sentences and like a PDF of an instruction manual that I already had. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. At this point, I look at Daniel's signature, and I notice he doesn't have a phone number on there. I wonder why, right? So I'm kind of starting to pass these harsh value judgments on Daniel. And I'm thinking, okay, I can't call him. I can't connect via Teams because I'm an external. So I'm stuck with only the email. So I send him another email, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to be super clear. And by the way, I had suggested him, you want to talk? But he ignored that part. So I said to him, hey, okay, so I take a screenshot of the manual that he sent me. I go back into the platform. I take a screenshot of the error message. I color code all of the questions, and I put little dialogues, and I try to make sure that we have everything super clear. And it looked like a thesis, basically. I mean, I would be horrified if I had to open up that email too, to be quite honest. And do you think Daniel answered me? What do you think?
No.
Of course not. If I opened that email, I'd also be like, forget it, I'll deal with this later. So a week went by, I don't hear from Daniel. I send him a little, hey, did you get my email? No answer, crickets. And at this point, the program has already been delayed by about 3 weeks. And it's all hinging on this one little thing. So at that point, I think, okay, I gotta get this guy to talk to me. That's all I need, for him to talk to me. So I decide to take a deep breath and write to Daniel and change my approach. So I say to Daniel, you must be flooded with tons of requests, and I imagine you must be super busy. I really need to get this PO going so that I can give our internal client a date. Is there any way that we can have a quick 10-minute call just to get the ball rolling? I don't want to take up more than your time, and I don't want you to have to be reading my emails. He finally wrote me back and said, okay, Maria, here are a couple slots, let's talk. We talked on the Teams call, and it took us 10 minutes to solve the problem. Okay? Did we just contribute to this $1.2 trillion in waste? You betcha. Does this ever happen to you? Okay. And here's the thing, it's easy to dismiss and say, oh, well, you know, it took me a little longer. But actually, if you quantify that, I spent easily 2 hours in between reading and sending emails, researching, doing the screenshots, sending the little arrows so that he could understand. And all of that, I verbalized in less than 10 minutes, and it took me about 2 hours to do all of that. That is a super waste. And we're not even counting the delayed return on investment of my client of having to delay the program by 3 weeks. Okay? Quantify that, and we're talking, I mean, not 1.2 trillion, but we're talking a little bit of money that keeps getting wasted each time. Okay? The trends shown in this study show that there is a increased movement from synchronous verbal communication, and, you know, if you think tapping somebody on the shoulder, talking to them on the phone, or a video call, there's a move from that to asynchronous communication, increasingly so. So think Slack, Teams chat, email, okay? And the problem is that more is not necessarily better, okay? So the question is, when we talk about trends, so what? So how does this affect us? Well, it affects us in that all of performance metrics that we see in organizations show that miscommunication shows up as inefficiency, shows up as less productivity, strained relationships, and stress. Okay, there you go. Doesn't show because it's a it's not a screen. So the increased stress is the biggest one. It stresses you out. Ask me if I was stressed with Daniel. Of course I was. And I was creating all kinds of, let's just say, less than kind value judgments on Daniel, right? Strained relationships, increased stress, etc. So what do we do about that? What do we think is the most important thing to do? Well, we need to consider the fact that more technology isn't necessarily going to solve all of our problems. And there's one thing I'd like to say, and that is I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention technology without also touching on the elephant in the room, which is the generational aspect as well. Because there has been a very real impact on that technology has had on different cohorts and how the habits have been developed throughout the years. Everyone's like, yep. Okay, so when we talk about generations, just so we're on the same page and everybody knows which cohort I'm talking about, let's do a generations 101, okay? So we know baby boomers, and here I'm looking at the people who are still in the workforce, okay? So we have baby boomers. Baby boomers are pretty much getting either they're already retired or on the way to retirement. So 60s and 70s, early 70s, okay? So they're kind of like, I'm out of here. Then we've got our Gen X, of which I'm a proud member, mostly late 40s and 50s. Okay, so they're kind of like in this, like the older, except for the baby boomers, they're kind of on the older side too. And then we've got our Gen Y or millennials, mostly in their 30s and in their early 40s. They're already hitting 40, having families, etc. And then we've got Gen Z or Zoomers, Centennials, right? Yes, is that you? Yes. Mostly in their 20s, and I know Muhammad here is also okay, Gen Z, Zoomers, etc. Okay, so, and on the bookend of each of these, older than the boomers, we've got the traditionals who are mostly in their 80s now, so they're not in the workplace, and then the generation after the Zoomers is Alpha. I guess we're starting with the alphabet all over again. So they're mostly kids who are 10 years old and younger. And we'll figure them out soon enough, I guess. Right? Okay, so now that we know that, I want to do a little exercise with you. I have here a list of mobile phone users. And on the right column, you can see how many minutes they use a month on actual phone calling. I'd like to see if you can guess the age or generation of the caller based on the number of minutes that they speak on the phone. So, is it super easy? Like, oh, it's super easy. Okay. Okay. Do you want to ask your neighbors, or you think you can figure it out on your own? You think you got it? Okay. So, caller A, Gen X. And the answer is yes, Gen X. Okay, how about caller B? Okay, you're very close. In this case, this person who's a real person is a traditional. But she's very close. And again, this is my family's bill. So this is my family's bill. But yeah, my mom she's like borderline traditional baby boomer. So yes. How about person C? You got it. And how about person D? Okay, almost. He's a young millennial, but he's kind of like he's kind of like the other one. So yes, he has the habits of more of a Gen Z. But do you see the difference between my mom's use of her phone and my son's use of his phone? It's exponential. Yeah, I mean. You know, this shows you, and you know what, this is funny because I saw it one day and I'm like, oh my gosh, and it just stayed with me, and I'm like, I got this is a perfect illustration of communication, the difference in perception of communication, how you communicate, that is incredible. Okay? So if you look at this, you can see the very different habits of each cohort, and imagine in the workplace how that affects us as well. So let's take a trip in the history of communication. So how did people do things once upon a time? Once upon a time, if you wanted to talk to somebody, you actually had to go visit them or tap them on the shoulder or write a letter on actual paper or parchment, if you go back to the medieval days, and have an actual person deliver that message. And that probably was the status quo for thousands of years, right? Fast forward to the late 19th century, when the telephone was invented, which really didn't become mainstream until the 20th century in people's homes. So all of a sudden we had a device that let us speak to somebody who was far away, and usually you had to share it with other people, right? And there was a certain protocol you had to go through in order to get connected to your desired party, which included greeting the person, introducing yourself or identifying who you are, and asking for whoever it was you wanted to speak to, at very least, right? And then sometimes you might have to break the ice, you know, if you called your friend and the mom answered and you're like, oh, hi, Mrs. So-and-so, nice day. Huh? So you had to kind of schmooze a little bit before you got to speak to the person. So it was like a little trial by fire, especially if there was a romantic interest and everybody in your family knew who had called you, right? There was no privacy. Maria, Ricardo's on the line. Who's that? So you got like the third degree, people would ask you. So, okay, fast forward. We get to the 1990s. And now people have a device in their hand. And by the way, you can see, okay? You had to have a lot of money back in the 80s to have that big brick, you know. But we usually, like in the 90s, we started getting to the flip phones, and that became more affordable and mainstream. And the wonderful thing was that now you had direct access to your desired party You didn't have to break the ice and schmooze and do that because you got direct contact. Now, texting was a problem because you had to press a button like 5 times to get the letter C, and then 5 times to press a space. And so texting wasn't very practical, and it was expensive. So it wasn't until we got the smartphones that all of a sudden that's where things changed. That's where we went to asynchronous communication. When texting became so convenient and so practical, you had privacy, you could send a message and multitask. You could think about a really cool answer or crowdsource your answer before answering so that you had the perfect answer or the perfect question all the time, right? So that's what happened there. Now the thing is, as we moved into asynchronous communication, and millennials were the first ones who actually entered into their youth, they came of age with this technology already, that became their default. Texting became the default. And with that convenience and privacy, there was a loss of the impromptu think on your feet skills. Okay? So that is one of the things. Now, it's very interesting because studies show also that Gen Z, and Gen Z can tell me how comfortable you are with phone calls. Not very?
I prefer text.
You prefer text?
Yeah, when I'm dealing with a problem, my parents tell me, but call people. I'm like, no. Message.
Why? Why does it make you uncomfortable to call? And this is key because the millennials started with the same thing. It was like this. They were very averse to phone calling for problem solving. Not to talk to people, but for anyone you don't know and have to solve a problem, it's like, it gives them chills, you know? So why? Do you know, can you identify what it is?
I don't know, really. It's like you said, it's more convenient to text.
Okay.
And maybe I have, I don't know, more time, to
okay.
Figure out what I'm going to say,
Uh-huh.
what I'm going to ask,
Okay.
or, if I need a buffer.
Okay. How about you?
Yeah, same exact thing.
Okay.
I think it's also like less practice.
Okay.
We always text.
Okay. And here's the thing. You said something. I don't know what I'm going to ask, and I don't know what to say. Because it's not perfect, it's not that thought out, it hasn't been researched. When you text, you have time to think, to ask, to this, to that. When you're on the phone, you're vulnerable. You're kind of like off the cuff, and you're like, I'll give you another example. My daughter had an issue at the university, and she had to deal something with the student loan office. And I said to her, just call. Mom, I don't know what to ask. And I say, you say to the lady, I'm sorry, I don't know what to ask you.
This is the problem.
I have a problem. And she's like, no. She took half a day off of work, drove all the way to the university, and dealt with it face to face. How much did that cost her? 4 hours of wages, gasoline, and her time. All because of that sense of discomfort of having to deal with the problem over the phone.
We were just talking about that, how I'm a millennial and I definitely prefer talking to somebody in person than calling them on the phone. But it's still the same interaction. So what's the difference? Why is it that we're so much more comfortable talking to somebody in person than over a device?
Exactly. Is it the lack of visual, perhaps? That's just auditory?
Maybe.
It's hard to read people
Without seeing their expression.
energy in, I believe on text, I can tell you, I'm fine. And you're, it's fine. But what about if I tell you face to face, I'm fine?
You
You
lose.
can tell in my face that something is going on, that the I'm fine is not really fine, and it could be the other way around. There could be a big problem. Maybe it's no, everything is okay. So you don't read that, so I think the message is lost.
For sure. I mean, I think all generations agree that face-to-face interaction is the most ideal because you have your words, your tone, and your nonverbal, all three. When you go to just a call, you lose the visual, so you only have the tone and the words. But when you go to written, you only have the words. So it keeps, and that's why, by the way, that's why emojis were invented, right? Because it's like, oh, I hope they don't take this the wrong way. Let me put a little smiley face so it's kind of like, hey, I'm just kidding, right? Because you don't have the nonverbal, you don't have the tone.
But the emojis are not confusing for everybody. I'm the only one lost.
Exactly. So this is the thing. We've got technology to help us, and it's very practical in certain aspects. But it's kind of like the GPS. Who memorizes how to get anywhere anymore? There have been studies that show we're losing our spatial abilities. Same thing is happening with the communication. We're losing some of our soft skills, our impromptu communication skills, when people become a little too comfortable with just one type of communication. But here's the thing. If we compare communication to a job, so say we need to get a message out, we need to get something done, we have to communicate because that's the main vehicle for our human interaction. And we've got this big box of tools, right? We got tons of tools now. We got all kinds of power tools and this and that. But the problem is that if you are just comfortable with one of the tools and you don't know how to use some of these other ones, you're going to get stuck. I mean, it's like, okay, I'm really good at hammering a nail on the wall. I can do that pretty well. Okay? But if I need to attach a screw and I try to use a hammer, I'm going to make a mess. I'm going to make a hole in the wall. Or if I try to grab a piece of wood and cut it in half and I don't use a saw, that's going to be a bigger mess. And then if I need for them to be the same size, I'm going to start sanding for like hours to get it, that's going to be triple the work, which takes us back to the example with Daniel. 10 minutes at the beginning would have saved me 2 hours and a lot of effort. Okay? So that's where we can see. So the question here is, are we a little too comfortable with just one tool that we're overusing it? And how can we make sure we're not putting ourselves into a box? Okay? I have another example here. This is it's a scenario. And here I'm going to let you talk to the person next to you or whatever. I'd like to see, what do you think? What channel of communication would you use in this particular situation? I'm going to give you a minute. So just discuss with someone next to you and tell me what do you think you should do?
A meeting.
Like a face-to-face
a meeting or Teams.
Yeah, either it's a team meeting or in-person meeting, but it has to be a meeting. Yeah, email would be too confusing, so like a meeting is the answer.
Okay, and think there's many different tools. It doesn't just have to be a face-to-face meeting. I mean, what kind of meeting? How would you do it? What would you expect? Any ideas? Any other tools besides a face-to-face? Is there anything? Excuse me?
Zoom.
A Zoom. Okay, so virtual.
Because of the time constraint, just in case.
Yeah,
everybody-
I wouldn't want to do email because you don't know if everybody's going to see it.
Okay.
I wouldn't, calling, you're not going to get everybody's opinion.
Okay.
And face-to-face meeting makes it a lot more difficult for people to get to come together. So at least with a Zoom or Teams, everybody can be wherever they are, but we can all see each other because we can all be on camera. So you can kind of feel like you're face-to-face and you can see tone.
Okay.
Because you can see the facial expressions.
Right.
But you can get a lot more accomplished.
Okay, for sure. So you need something that's real time. Whether it's technology that's going to help you be virtually together, but you need to be able to see people and talk right then and there. None of you can't start with the asynchronous. You have to go directly to the real-time synchronous. Okay? So one thing that you could do is just what you said, is use some kind of platform where you can have that meeting. I mean, if you're all located in the same place, wonderful. But if not, make sure you do something where you at least get a chance to talk. Now, here's something important. Kind of important to get the webcams on. And I can tell you that a lot of the clients I work with, sometimes I find a little bit of resistance to putting that webcam on. And it makes a huge difference. Like you said, if you cannot gauge the person's nonverbal, that person might have walked away for a cup of coffee and missed half of what you just said. And you know, I did a training this morning, and there was one person that kept turning her camera off. So when it came time to do a role play, guess who I called on? Because I asked her to put the camera on a couple of times. So I called on her, and she was like a deer in headlights. And I'm like, and so I had to coach her through to help her out, because I'm like, you're not going to disengage. I want you to learn. You're going to learn this, right? Whether you want to or not. So I and she was a little embarrassed, but I mean, we worked through it. But it's like, it's not the same. You don't have the same quality. You don't have the same commitment. So webcams, I always tell the leaders that I coach, let people know beforehand. Listen, for the sake of connection, for the sake of alignment, please put your webcams on. It'll make a huge difference. And if you tell them why, they usually will align and comply, because you're telling them that there's a valid reason for it. You can use all kinds of collaborative tools like breakouts or polls to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And of course, a follow-up. Yes, a follow-up email, or now they've got all kinds of the AI meeting notes and all of that, just to make sure that everything is recorded afterwards. That is probably the best way to work on it, right? And here's the thing. It's just a matter of making sure that you're choosing the right tool, okay? Now, when it comes to, we've talked about the channels. Now, when we talk about the actual interaction, that makes people a little nervous too. Remember that slide where I showed you that people get a little stressed? Part of the stress is thinking, how am I going to tell this person that we're not going to make the deadline? Gee, how am I going to give this person feedback? How am I going to ask this person for their support on this? So a lot of times we're stressing about how to ask for something, give feedback, whatever. And if we are losing a lot of those skills, it's going to become even harder. And here's the thing. We've gone from an agricultural economy to industrial economy to a knowledge economy. And guess what? Now AI is taking over the knowledge. So we're stuck with figuring out how we are going to interact alongside the AI and with each other. So everything that is human interaction related is probably going to be even more important than ever. Okay? So what are some of the things we can do? I can tell you I've been doing training and coaching for about over 20 years, 25 years now. And there's always certain things that come up all the time. And I've put together, to make it easier, I put together like a simple model that touches upon most of the things. And I call it the CLEAR model. Is that easy to remember or what? CLEAR. Very easy. It's clear. Okay. So it's basically the first, and by the way, it's not sequential. It's simultaneous. So conveying intent, being able to listen, being able to empathize with others, adjust, and reframe. And I'm going to give you what each one of them, what each one of these is. So when I say convey intent, it basically means that if you can start off giving the other person a little bit of context as to why you're about to ask them for something, or if you have to say no, what the context is before you say no, or if you need to ask for a favor, or if you need, whatever it is, if you start off with a little bit of context of telling them why something is necessary, it's very probable that they will align a little bit more. They might give you the benefit of the doubt because you're being courteous to bring them into your reasoning. So for example, with Daniel, I started out telling him, listen, Daniel, I need to make sure that I get this PO so that we don't delay the project, and I don't want to take up a lot of your time. So I'm stating my positive intent. Dude, I don't want to give you a hard time. I know you're busy. I need this other thing. This is why I'm asking for a phone call. If I would have just said, Daniel, I need to talk to you. Tell me when. That's just the what and the how. I'm not giving him the why. And people resist you when you tell them what you need without telling them why you need it. They'll be like, well, why? Okay, start with the why, and that way you save a lot of time and effort. So if you start with the why, you say you state your intent, it makes things a lot easier. The next thing is, and by the way, it's good to assume the positive intent on the other side as well. Listening. You'd probably have heard ad nauseum, listening, active listening, nod your head, and paraphrase. It goes beyond that. I mean, anyone can pick up those little tips. But here's what will make a difference. If you can ask some really key open-ended questions, you'll become a better negotiator. You'll influence people much more because you'll know what their needs are, and you'll be able to make a proposal that will be valuable to them. So questions that start with what and how can be super valuable. What's the next step you think we need in order to get there? How do you think the client might react to this? What and how can really help you a lot. Moving on to empathize. We hear so much. How many of you have been hearing the buzzword of emotional intelligence and empathy? Okay? Now, this is always interspersed or intertwined in a lot of what we do when we're communicating. But if you can, in a very authentic way, show the other person that you have thought about how whatever it is might impact them, then you're going to get on their good side. So it's a way of acknowledging and validating them. So for example, with Daniel, I know that you must be really busy. Daniel, I don't want to take a lot of your time because I know that you probably have. And here's the thing. Initially, I wasn't so kind with Daniel. For me, I was in my own little narrative. And I was like, Daniel is such a jerk. I can't believe he's ignoring me. And he doesn't care. And he's probably lazy and incompetent, right? That's the first thing you think because you're just thinking about how it affects you. And it wasn't until you take that step back and be like, okay, well, wait a minute. I need to write an email to this guy. What's going to motivate him? And then I'm like, well, he's probably like really busy because everybody's busy nowadays. We keep having to do more and more with less and less, right? We're probably doing the job that 30 years ago, 5 people would do, right? Isn't it true? Okay. So once you empathize, it's easier for people to open up, and you're also opening up, being a little more vulnerable. Vulnerability fosters trust. The next thing is adjusting and adapting. And I could give you a full semester on this because this is the holy grail of effective communication. If you learn to be observational, if you can adapt, if you can style switch, you can pretty much communicate with anybody, anytime. And this includes, for example, why do you think there's so many tools out there like DISC and Myers-Briggs and your style and your color and this and that? It tells you what your communication style is. And the thing here is the secret, whether you're talking about leadership, whether you're talking about coaching, whether it's conflict management, whether it's feedback, whether it's influencing skills or negotiation, you're going to see that it all has to do with being situational. But the best leaders know how to be, well, that's the whole point of situational leadership. You don't lead everybody in the same way any more than you parent all your children in the same way. You have to adjust to each person's needs and motivations so that you can get the most out of them, right? You need to speak their language. And lastly, we've got the reframing bit of it. When I talk about reframing, what I'm referring to is making the conversation go towards an objective, making sure that you're going towards a solution of a problem rather than, I can't do this, it's impossible, or we don't have the resources. So if you can reframe what you can do rather than what you can't, it makes the conversation continue to flow in a positive way, okay? And this is especially important if you're dealing with clients, right? Any kind of customer service. You don't want to be like, oh, sorry, our system won't let us do that. That's one of my pet peeves. I'm like, oh, the system won't let me do that. And I'm like, it's just a system. Can't you just like manually do, you know? So that's one of the things that kind of gets me annoyed. So I have one last exercise that you could do with your next door neighbor here. I've got 3 sentences, and it's framed in a negative. So how would you change that to reframe it in a positive way? And if anybody just wants to volunteer and say, I think I would say it this way. Go ahead,
Well,
Stephanie.
For the first one, the system will let me do that. I would tell a person, hold on, let me ask a few people that know a little bit more than I do.
Okay.
So that way we can figure it out and help you out with your problem.
There you go. All right. You don't have to say, sorry, I can't help you, I have no idea, no clue. No, it's like, let me find out who can help you with this. Great. Who wants to do the second one? Okay, go ahead.
Like maybe something like that's not really in my expertise, but I will, consult with somebody that knows more than I do.
There you go. Okay. And even if you don't want to take it on because it's like, well, I don't want to promise something that's going to put me in a bind, you could always say, you know what, let me ask so-and-so, and I'll copy you both in an email. You know what, Joe's the guy who's taking care of that now. How about if I put you in touch with him? There you go. You know, you're not just sending the person off to whatever, you know. You know what, that's the area, legal is the area that can tell you a little bit more. It's not so much our compliance, but legal can tell you if that's something that we need to consider. How about I put you in touch with so-and-so? Okay, great. Last one. I don't have time for that. What could you say instead? Yeah?
Let's establish a schedule so that we'll be able to allocate the proper amount of resources in order to meet your deadline.
There you go. Let's set schedules so that we make sure everything's done, you know, on time. There you go. You just switch it slightly and it creates so much more goodwill. Because sometimes without realizing, we complicate our own lives just because we're using, you know, we might be using certain phrases that might be irritators. And by the way, when we talk about irritators, they're sentences or words that just get under our skin, right? For me, an irritator is, as I said before, because what I'm hearing is, okay, you are a moron, right? Okay, as I said before, you know, or let me repeat myself. It's like, please, I'm not deaf and I'm not a moron.
It's almost saying like, because I think you're an idiot.
Yeah.
But I think you should.
Exactly. So we got to watch out because sometimes we might be falling into the same trap, and we might not even be doing it, you know, to annoy anybody, but we might be saying it, and then the other person might get a little more defensive, and we don't know why. And it's usually because you might be making, you know, using an irritator instead of reframing in a positive way what you need to do.
And we have to remember that the words, you're just putting words, but whoever is reading it, what about if they're in the bad mood?
Uh-huh.
They are reading it in a bad mood.
Absolutely.
So if you said, I don't have time for that, maybe you're so happy that morning, I'm like, okay, let's try later. But if you're in a bad mood, you're like,
Neither do I.
you don't have time for me.
Exactly. So that is my clear method, and my invitation to you is to take into consideration not only the channel that you're using, with your big, nice toolbox, but also the interactive part, and make sure that you're pulling out the right instrument so that you don't fall into the numbers, the 1.2 trillion, right? That's what you want to avoid. So before I open up to questions and answers and leave you with one last thought, I would like to ask you a favor so that I can express this message to more people, gets a little bit of feedback. It's a very short feedback questionnaire that won't take you more than 2 minutes. Would you mind just completing this for me? And then when you're done, you can just put it down, and I'll just close out with a few more thoughts and open it up to Q&A. I think I saw it on that table, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
And by the way, if you'd like, there's a PDF that includes did you get it?
Yeah, so I was really good. I'm not going to remember the
Oh, good, yeah. It's a little quiz that measures how effective your communication style is, and then it gives you like a little cheat sheet with the clear model, so you can have it there.
Let's put it on a t-shirt.
Be clear.
Be clear, everybody. So you can download that if you want. It's my gift to you. Okay, so just in conclusion, I just want to remind you that the best use of your time and effort is not to go back and forth, but rather to actually be able to take an all-inclusive tropical vacation and enjoy the sun and not be fretting over miscommunication. So I'd like to open it up in case anybody has any questions or any comments that you'd like to share. Was this useful?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Yes? Uh-huh.
Like we were talking about for people Gen Z my age, how we can work on getting better at phone calls and face-to-face meetings without that anxiety of not knowing how is it gonna turn out, or am I gonna seem like a moron? Because that's like, we're usually in the workplace, we're talking to older people
Yes.
that know a lot more about than us. So how can we go about that?
Okay. I read that there is a lady, I think she's called like the phone lady or something. She's this calling coach that charges $500 an hour to teach young people how to talk on the phone. I'm serious. There is a thing. The market, supply and demand. And but here's the thing. One of the things that I read, and I think I saw like a little blurb that she says one of the exercises that she has people do is for a whole weekend, she'll say, and you start with your family and friends and tell them, look, I'm doing this exercise. So anytime you want to communicate with them, you got to call them. And you tell them, listen, I'm going to be doing this, heads up. I'm not going to text you. I got to call you every time. With people you feel more comfortable with, so that it's kind of like, okay. And then I think little by little she starts doing other types of exercises. But the first thing is, I guess it's the mindset of knowing that it is okay to be vulnerable. It is okay to feel like an idiot, because when you're trying to solve something, you're not supposed to have all the answers. That's why you're calling somebody to get help or to get support or whatever. If you start, again, convey intent. If you start with the why, I'm calling you because I'm really stuck and I don't know where to go, and maybe you can point me in the right direction. If you do that, you're kind of like, hey, I'm laying it all out there, and you'll find that people will be very empathetic to you. My daughter's actually gotten a lot better about calling now. But now she's finally adulting, Now she's 34, almost 34. And she's got 2 kids, so it's kind of like, you start, I think it's that you start not caring so much what people think about you the older you get. So it's like, hey, I got to solve this. Huh?
So wait till 40, it's even better.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't have the performance anxiety anymore, but the thing is that nobody is judging you. And this is what I said to her. I said, you know what? You're taking yourself a little too seriously. You're not that important. People don't really care that you don't know everything.
And the person on the other side of the line, you may be feeling like an idiot as well. So.
Yes, exactly. So I would say just, what? It's like, when you learn a new language and you're like, oh, I don't speak perfectly, so I don't want to say it wrong. It's like, well, how are you going to practice? If you screw up, it's like, hey, well, at least I'm trying, and and some people will be like, oh, no, this is how you say it, or that's how you say it. And then every time